powerful form of coaching we call integral coaching. And it's a methodology that I'd like to share with you today, as well as some of the pragmatic questions you might have. So I have sort of scouted around and asked people what question they might have, but of course I won't remember everything in the order that you may have it, so please, as I'm speaking, please feel free to just interject and make inquiries as you go. I don't have a particular format, because I found I've got a whole lot of slides, but most people actually are terribly bored with PowerPoint, as am I. So I'd far rather have more of a conversation with you than a stand-up presentation. So there are kind of two places to start. The one is a general conversation around, well, what is coaching from our perspective? How do we see and understand coaching to be? And then the other one is something which interests those who are more theoretically minded, which is what are the roots and the foundations of the school of coaching. So what I'd like to propose is I'm going to spend just 5 minutes sharing with you a very quick flash of what the theoretical underpinnings are of the school, not to go through them or to teach them in any way, but simply to name them so that you can see that whatever I share with you has an enormous, we stand on the shoulders of giants. This is the philosophy underpinning us. We integral in the sense of we integrate so many teachings and learnings from so many different disciplines and then distill it down to something that looks so simple and yet it is so profound that I find I've taught this work and done this kind of coaching literally all over the world. From Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, that part of the world, Singapore, all the way throughout Africa, from the southern Africa, all the way through to the Congo, West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, Egypt, into the Middle East. We've worked, as well as Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, London. We got to the first world too. And Switzerland, as well as obviously in the US, which is the core of where this root comes from. But what I've discovered in my travels is that this school of coaching seems particularly universal to the human condition. So wherever I go in the world, whether it's in developed economies, the most sophisticated, or the least sophisticated, almost tribal economies, and everything in between, whether it's in the business world, or the NGO space, or whatever sort of application I've discovered, that people somehow can connect with this style of coaching and it makes a profound impact. So that for me is what allows me to feel very comfortable to share this approach with you. So let me start off with the theory, so to just give my, in a sense, those are the credentials I'd like to give rather than mine personally. And that is that, so we have a whole lot of models, which this is on purpose, very tiny and illegible writing. We have a whole lot of models that we use, but underneath it, and I took about 3 years to drag this literature review out of the founder of the School of Coaching, because he reads like 50 books a month and doesn't want to think about these things. And my job, part of my job, is to make this work visible and academically credible in the world. So then I discovered, all right, there's literature all the way from the pre-1900s, from the most early days, Socrates, all the way into the ancient past, all the way through to the present. But there are 5 main streams. There's a philosophical stream, which I'll go through just now. There's a stream of the biology and cognitive sciences, which, of course, the more we study neuroscience, many of you may be more familiar with this than others, the more we see it all aligns. There is a strong and usually invisible spiritual undertone from all philosophies. So it's not a religious thing, but what are the spiritual teachings telling us about human beings and the way we are in the world? There's, of course, psychology roots, which all forms of coaching do have. It takes the psychological aspect into account. And then something which we brought in about 2008, 2010, is the whole field of narrative. What is the story we live in and the story we tell ourselves, and how that opens us up, but how it can also shut us down without even realizing it. So I unpacked all this, and I realized that, philosophy all the way from Socrates, Plato, Nietzsche, all the way to Heidegger, all the way through to the modern era, hermeneutics, ontology, phenomenology, all these philosophical streams are part of the roots of our coaching. In the biology and cognitive sciences, it started in the 1920s. We've got everything from Ida Rolf, and the whole change is embodied. You can't change only in your mind. You can read as many books as you want. You can study as much as you want. But if you don't change your behavior, then nothing changes in your life. And that's one of the primary cornerstones. This isn't just a kind of school of coaching that talks to you and applies to your perspective. If you don't change your habitual patterns of behavior, you will not experience change. Spirituality, all the way from the most ancient texts and philosophies and prophets, all the way through up until the kind of essential spirituality that many people ascribe to now, from Cornfield, Goldstein, or Mars. Psychology, of course, how much more can one do, all the way, all the psychological schools, and all the way from, and the big thing also is the Piaget, the developmental work. So our school is very much developmental in intention. We don't believe that human beings are stuck, is they can deepen their level of development and grow in many dimensions. And then the whole area of narrative, how we language our reality in the world. So that is the theory. And we don't actually need to worry about that anymore. We do that. Okay. So we have no prescribed forced reading for our students, because if people have an interest in the theoretical base, they go there of their own accord. But actually what makes you a good coach isn't studying. What makes you a good coach is practice. It's an apprenticeship. It's a practitioner's art. That's our primary approach. So, I know I rushed a little bit through that. Any questions about the theory? Other than just everything. Other than everything. Okay. But maybe I should start. There are some people, when I walked around the room, there are some people who are here as very experienced coaches, and that's fantastic. And there are some people here who know absolutely nothing about coaching. So what I'd like to do is start off at the core and say, how can I, in 5-10 minutes, describe to you how I would describe coaching, our style of coaching. And then we can build on that. So one of the other challenges we faced when we started coaching in South Africa, 13 years ago, we opened our school of coaching, was that in that place in the world, nobody had even heard about coaching at all. It was brand new. And even now, these days, we discover that many people, they think they know what coaching is, but of course, if you ask people, there'll be as many different definitions in the room as there are people, more often than not. So in fact, part of what I worked on is how can I explain coaching without doing this, which I never do to my students even. You can see, I know there's some students here going, wow, we don't look like, but I do, but how can I explain it almost on the back of a matchbox, in a very untheoretical way. So the way I decided to do it is, is pictures. And if these are two people, here is your coachee who's coming to you with something that they're unsure about or stuck on. And this is the first thing I'd like to mention. For many people, and again I've heard from Swiss people, so I'm not saying it's from my, that in Switzerland, but some people have told us that there's still this premise that coaching is remedial in intention. It's for problems. It's for people with problems. So, and that's where we started in South Africa, and certainly in the US as well. Originally, coaching was seen as something to help people with problems. Nowadays, it's actually a badge of success. They only give coaching to the high potentials, particularly in South Africa. It's very much a prestigious thing. So it's kind of, who's your coach? You know, do you qualify to get a coach? Because then you're seen as someone who's worthy of development. In fact, many executives now I get asked to coach when they get their promotion. As part of their package, they get a coach to work alongside with them to help support them in their new career, which makes perfect sense. But so most times when people arrive, they're stuck with something. It could be in their new fabulous new career, but not entirely sure how to go about it. Or it could be that they're literally having a breakdown in one of their relationships. It could be a family matter. It could be a workplace matter. But it's something that you're a little bit stuck with. There are many different ways of engaging with people with problems. Right? And we know so many of them. It is, I could work with you as a teacher, and I could teach you. So when someone joins an organization, who's going to take them around and say, this is the culture, this is how things are done around there. And it's actually, that's a teaching moment because you're sharing information they do not yet have. So teaching is when I know something you don't, and I tell you it, and I explain to you how to do it. Right? That is a wonderful way of engaging. All right? But even, here's the news, even if you do it nicely, it's still not coaching. Okay? So your induction coach is not a coach. It's just somebody who's your induction person, who's taking you around, but they're doing it nicely, so we call them a coach. And because the word coaching is very fashionable, everything's a coach. So now even managers, they're urged not to manage, they must coach everything. So in fact, some managers are sort of warned, no, you must performance coach your staff. You don't performance manage them anymore. All right? And you coach your staff. But when you look at what you're supposed to do under coaching your staff, actually it's all the management tasks. So actually it's become a little bit of a difficult word, this coaching. Anyway, so I might teach somebody. That means I'm going to teach you something that I know and you don't. Great. I might be a consultant. Right? A consultant is going to come to you and say, all right, let me come analyze the situation. Here are 3 recommendations, and this is my advice. You take this. 3 possibilities. Here's my advice. The consultant will give you advice, and they should. That's what you're paying them for. Great. I might be your manager, in which case I might be more or less directive. I might listen carefully and let you come up with 3 options and say, well, which one do you want? And improve that. I might, what else might I do? I might tell you what to do, right? If I'm not very sure, I'll let you know what to do. I might even be, oh, don't worry, I'll do it. I'll just do it myself. Okay. And that's great, because when I'm a manager, I am in charge of your success, of your standards, and of the output that you deliver. And so I'm going to control that. As a manager, I need to have an element of assessment and control. Perfectly legitimate. Even as a leader, I'm here to provide you with direction and guidance. That's what leadership is about. Inspiration, direction, guidance. in varying levels. Fantastic. As a mentor, one of the most wonderful and powerful relationships that are available to us is having a mentor. I urge everybody to get themselves a mentor. And the task of a mentor is not just to, they sometimes teach, they share, but they particularly share their story. This is what I did. This is the scars on my back. Learn from my mistakes. Learn from my experiences. Research shows that people who choose mentors choose people who look like them, who have similar career paths, who they can say, I want to look like that, I want to talk like that, I want to be like this, I want to have those sorts of skills or outputs. Fantastic. A mentor will guide you and tell you what to do, where to go, and to varying and lesser degrees. All amazing? And none of them are coaching. And again, I'll say, even if they're done nicely, it's still not coaching. And a lot of people you say, oh, it's a coaching and mentoring. Let's do a coaching and mentoring intervention, like it's the same thing. So this is, so I've told you what coaching, what's not coaching. All those wonderful modalities, fantastic, but they're not coaching. What is coaching then? This is where it gets exciting, you see? Because here's the difference. Here's the key difference. Coaching is about understanding the human being in front of me. Understanding how are they thinking. Understanding how are they feeling. And understanding how does their physical behavior and their physiology, sensations, cause them to relate to this problem or obstacle or stuckness. Because this in and of itself is not a problem. It's not a problem by itself. It's a problem because I'm relating to it in a particular way that causes me to see it or experience it as a problem. And if I don't understand how this person is really engaging with this, then I'm not able to understand what's blocking them. And therefore, I can't block what the real underpinning challenge is actually. So I could say a lot more, but I'm going to pause there. Any comments or questions? Because what are the implications of this? What are the implications of this for the coachee and for the coach? This isn't a rhetorical question. This is
It sounds like behavioral psychology.
Sorry?
It sounds like behavioral or behaviorist psychology. So what would be the difference for you?
Between this and everything. Well, before we go there, can I, because there are some people here who may not know what that is, and I'm not sure I want to, I'd like to go to that place of what is the difference, but maybe can we stick with that question and then we'll get to the what is the difference?
I think you have to be a good listener.
Okay. So the first challenge is you've got to be a really good listener, because you not only have to listen to what they're saying, you have to listen with the intention of understanding this person, not with the intention of fixing the problem. If you listen with the intention of fixing the problem, then you're going to start wanting to give them advice, and you're going to want to start to fix the problem. But the premise of coaching is you're not there to solve their problem for them. You're there to develop this human being so that they can solve the problem for themselves. They need to start to understand what it is about them that's causing this to be a problem. active listening. So not even just listening well, but actively listening. So you listen for what they're saying, but also what they're not saying. What their body is showing you as they're speaking. What's really going on. Deep, deep, deep listening. And that kind of listening is where we put ourselves aside. So if you want a particular outcome, one of the hardest things in coaching is you have to let go of your outcome. Your outcome. You have to let go of that. And you have to work with letting this person understand themselves better. I mean, I once coached somebody who, every year at budget time, would collapse. They'd start winding up and getting more and more frazzled and running around, and then they'd get more and more stressed and bad-tempered, and every year, around about just a week or two before their budget had to be in, they would fall ill. And then they wouldn't be able to do the budget, and it would be chaos. And it was really a major problem. And then someone else would take over and do the budget for them. And then for the rest of the year, them and their team would be irritated because they didn't have the right budget. And I was coaching this person, and this wasn't turns out, anyway, I was coaching this person, and we noticed the cycle, and they said to me, I can't do the budget, and it's terrible, and it's so stressful, and I'm sick, and everything. I said, but let's just stop and say, what's really happening here? What's going on for you around this time of year? What's going on? And they said, no, but there's so much pressure, and it's stressful, and I said, but just and we started unpacking what was happening for them. And it's actually, at the end of the day, you look and you say, it's so interesting, no one had done this before. But when we really unpacked it, they said, you know what? In their very first year as a manager, they got, in South Africa, often people get promoted very quickly because we have such a small skill base. So they got promoted as a youngster, all right? First budget they were doing, they thought, oh, how hard can this be, as young people do. And they went in and they gave them this budget, and it was a disaster that their whole team had the most appalling year, and because budgets can be a very strategic thing. And the experience, they had to live with that trauma for the year, and they got so much flack for it, is that the experience lived on as an emotional scarring that person had never talked about, never even really remembered it, because it was like 8 years previously. But when we went back and said, when did you start feeling like this? They took it back to that question. And they said, okay, so I feel like I felt that whole year. Every year, there's sort of 2 weeks before budget. And then I fall sick, someone else does it for me, and I don't have to deal with that feeling. And once we unpacked that, we were able to start working with what's really going on here. That absolute terror and fear of getting it wrong. So part of your question around the difference between, any form of therapy and coaching is part of the challenge is, yes, one does go back into the past, might be the recent or the longer past, but here's the difference, is with coaching, it's very much about saying, so how is this showing up now in your life? And how do we change moving forward? There's a plan to move forward with it. So part of a very important, this school of coaching, it's not just developing the awareness that, oh, I have this block about doing budgets, for example. It's what is the underlying capability? Or we used to say competence, the underlying competence, but then HR professionals would get all twisted up about, okay, is it a competence or is it really a and so then I said, okay, the underlying capability, skill, capability. Well, it's not even a skill, is it? It's a capability. I'm able to do it. We work in the area of the underlying capability. That is held in our habitual pattern of behavior. So we're talking at the micro patterns that we all live with. The micro patterns. So it's not the big deeds that we do. It's not the once a year the budget. It's underneath my relationship to this particular thing, this was an underlying pattern around saying, well, big emotions for this individual were a problem. They in this case was the budget, but you always find that a particular event is like a symptom. And underneath that symptom is a pattern of behavior. So what was his underlying pattern was that actually he tended to avoid all big emotional events. This was just the big symptom that made it more visible to us. So as a coach, it's what new capabilities, what new patterns of behavior would enable him to develop the capacity to actually cope with large emotions, for example. So the first thing is, how do you develop a person's self-awareness? And I don't mean it in a grandiose sense, like a big spiritual, existential sense that we can get to, but I'm talking pragmatically. So most people do not actually know what they're doing most of the time. You know, people will walk around and they'll not realize that, for example, if they're in a bad mood, they'll walk in like this and they won't notice that it's just their frown is freaking out everybody in the team when they walk in. These, because I'm talking these underlying patterns that are almost invisible to us. And so when you start your journey as a coach is how do you make this person more aware of their own underlying patterns and the impact that's having on everybody around them, places and things around them. Okay, so if you are more aware, you're able to become what we call self-correcting. If I know that my facial expression is going to generate impact on those around me, the minute I'm aware of that, I can start doing something about it. I can start going, okay, so let's say I was coaching someone, and I once coached this executive who was heading up a team, sales team. It was I asked him if I could use his story, because it's one of those lovely stories you like to use. And he was coaching a sales team. He'd been there for some years, but he'd had a new team brought on. They'd been with him for a year, and they were a disaster. They'd gone from being a high-performing team into a disaster team. And he said, they are useless. This team is a disaster. They're just terrible. They never do anything. They never suggest anything. I have to push them all the time. They've got no motivation. They've got no creativity. They're just... Okay? Are we familiar? They said every meeting, they just sit there and they're lazy and they're useless. So it was one of the times I was brought in with a problem situation, and I said to him, so here's the problem. I'm not coaching the team. They're not even here. I'm coaching you. So how would it be if we were to look at you first? Yeah, but it's the team. They're the problem. Okay. But let's start here. And eventually, but you've got to wait, because if someone doesn't sign up for coaching, they're not going to tell you about what's going on inside of them. If they don't trust you, if they don't want to tell you what's really happening, they're not going to. So if you don't get their enrollment, their buy-in, you can sit in front of someone and call it coaching all day long, but you're not going to be coaching them, because they're not going to share. So that's the first challenge. So this has to be a partnership. It's not, oh, I'm the guru coach and I'm going to coach you and tell you everything. It doesn't work like that. Not this story. So it's how do you develop that genuine trust? So the first thing is, I sat him down and I said, so tell me about what happens when you're with a team. Oh no, they're terrible. And eventually I got him, I said, tell me about your behavior. I said, what do you mean? I said, so how do you behave when you're with the team? Tell me about that. It's like, well, I'm normal. I'm normal. What's wrong with you? They're just frustrating, but, I said, no, but describe to me, what are your behaviors? And he honestly didn't understand my question. So I said, okay, I want you to go away and notice. I want you to notice, and I had to give him a list, because he didn't understand how to observe himself. I said, I'd like you to notice, when you're with them, your posture. When you start a meeting, and if it changes over the course of the meeting. I'd like you to notice your voice. How does it start? What happens to your voice? Does anything change? I'd like you to notice what gestures you use. I'd like you to notice anything about, you know, just those few things, how you sit in your chair. That's all. It's okay, all right, I'll do that. I said, but I'm sure it's nothing unusual. It's okay, off you go. And so sometimes, because he doesn't know, then how can I know? I can't know. But I did notice something, all right? I sat the first hour and a half, and I must have said like 5 sentences. I couldn't get any airtime at all. It was amazing. So I thought, all right. So I was a bit curious about, so the other thing, oh yeah, and he liked figures. I said, I want you to notice the ratio of how much speech you have and how much you talk and how much they talk. So do a little chart. So he came back and he said, now remember, your coachees are not stupid. And they're not stupid. They answer themselves very quickly. He came back and said, Janine, wow. How did you know to get me to do this? I said, no, so what did you find out? He said, you know, I discovered this. And he brought out his book and he'd done it. He said, I speak 83% of the time. And he said, and I tracked my movement. He says, I walk into a Monday morning meeting and my voice is soft. I sit down and he said, and then they just sit there and they look at me and start, I get so irritated. And then I start talking louder and louder, trying to get them to go, all right, to say something, anything. He said, eventually, I was standing over the table like this and shouting. And my voice got louder and louder. He said, oh, okay. So now this was invisible to me before. And I know it might sound extreme, but you'd be amazed at how many people. I said, so what do you feel when you say all this? What are the consequences? He said, well, I can't believe they still work for me. He said, I hate to be managed like this. This is terrible. I said, okay, so what would you like us to do? He said, well, I need to work on this. I really do. He said, but don't worry, I will. He said, so now I'm going to stop shouting and I'll sit down and I'll do it. I said, okay. He said, yeah, it's easy. He said, I'll just not do it. Okay. How easy do you think that'll be? Oh, easy. No trouble. You watch. All right, off you go. So he went. He came back 2 weeks later. He said, oh dear, we have a problem. We have a problem. Because, he said, it's not enough that I realize my own behaviors, but I don't know how to behave differently. I don't know how to listen. He said, not only do I talk so much, but I discovered when I tried to stop talking that I'm always interrupting people because they don't talk fast enough or whatever it is, I'm interrupting. He said, this is really hard. And I said, yes, but that's why we have 12 months together. Just because it is hard to change your habit patterns. That's the hardest thing in the world. So, but because he was aware, he could become self-correcting. So the good news is, over time, we developed what we call practices. Practices are little things that people do to change their habit patterns. So an example of a practice might be, for him, we agreed before he spoke, he would make sure both feet were flat on the ground, all right? So whether he was sitting, he'd often have his feet up or say feet grounded. He would take a big breath. So not long, nothing dramatic. No one would notice he was doing it. And then he would try, if possible, he would try to write down what he wanted to say first. So it got up there. And at first he couldn't. You know, at first he managed the breath, and it's kind of, you know, he found he had to exaggerate, but over time it became more embodied. And eventually he was able to pause, write down, and more he started saying, you know, Janine, I actually didn't have to say much at all in that meeting. It was on my list, but when I was ready to close the meeting, I realized that actually they had said everything that needed to be said. I didn't have to say it, they said it. And he was able to correct himself because he was aware. But then the other outcome of coaching is that you become self-generating. And what that means is, he came to me one day, and we were working quite firmly on his team, and it was such a dramatic thing because it was a major sales unit. And there was so much to do in there, and he never really spoke about his personal life, which I don't force coaches to talk about. You know, I say, because why? Everything that goes on in this human being is going to show up at home and vice versa. He came to me one day and he said, you know what? I suddenly realized that if I was doing this at work, I was probably doing this at home. And he said, so I didn't tell you, but I've been trying all this stuff at home. And it has made the most profound difference. Our family meals used to be terrible affairs. You know, I'd either be shouting, you know, everyone would sulk, they would just be awful. He said, we now actually have conversations and stuff like that. So we really, our family dynamic has fundamentally changed. And he told me this afterwards. I had nothing to do with it, nothing at all. But when you work at the level of a pattern of behavior, not a solution to a problem, you find that you impact the whole of the person's life, even if you never talk about their personal life. Or if you were doing their personal life, even if you never talk about their business. So we call it executive coaching, but actually, you know, it's life coaching. But executives don't like that. They feel like they shouldn't have lives, so I don't know what it is. So, and then what you also get is an increased, I always know how, increased capability or increased level of performance. What happens is, because people are feeling more aligned with themselves, more able to unstick themselves, more able to deal with their own problems, they're able to generate solutions using these new capabilities. Their performance, in other words, not work performance, but they can do what they want to do. They become more able in the world, more coherent. And so these are the three major products of integral coaching. You leave people self-correcting, self-generating with an improved performance. I mean, this guy's team was so nice. After about 7-8 months, they were actually nearly at the top. And the following year, he phoned me and he said, we were back at the top of the awards again. So I said, can I please use your story? He said, yes, of course. So that was, you know, and it's not always so spectacular, but sales is quite a nice environment because you can see the impact quite quickly. So we use practices and observations. As in, to develop notice what you're up to. Because if you don't observe yourself, you don't know what you're doing, then you won't know what to change. The snag is this: as a coach, this is very difficult because you become very unimportant. All you do is provide a container and some questions and lines of inquiry, and later on when we teach you in the 6-month program, which is the associate coaching course and the year-long program, how to do this. Yes, you do provide some practices and observations, but who does the work is the coachee. You are just a conduit, a vessel, if you like. And so it's a very humbling thing to do. It's not, you're not the fancy guru, whatever, motivational speaker thingy. You're not. And you have to constantly let yourself go. Let your own desire to give advice or to tell them this fabulous story or whatever. It's about letting that go all the time. So you have to be very honest to yourself. Which means that when we teach people how to become coaches, which is what a lot of you are here are curious about, a large part of that journey is to understand yourself. Because if you don't understand yourself, you won't know what might cause you to interrupt this process. And you can't get somebody to truly share with you unless you are able to be in a non-judgmental space. So a lot of what we work with is how to let go of your own inner judgments, half of which we don't even realize we're busy with. How to constantly let go of your own inner dynamics, inner judgments, so that you can be there for the other person without judging them. Doesn't mean you condone them, doesn't mean you collude, but you don't judge. Which is quite a big ask, since we're all human. So I've tried to give you a story, an example, a little bit of how it worked. I'm not sure if I've answered your question yet. Not really.
I'm still thinking about it.
Yes. And I'll tell you a secret, is I'm not psychologically trained. I was going to say psychologically trained. No, I'm not trained as a psychologist. So I wouldn't feel competent to have that debate. But what I can say that most people find doesn't offend, because often we have psychologists who come study with us, or counselors, or people who are practitioners of human behavior. And this is one definition I've discovered seems to help people who know from zero to very experienced. Let's say this is the future, and this is the past. And these are problems, and these are possibilities. Coaches are invited to work with people when they are wanting to get to a future possibility. Oh, sorry, that's supposed to be a star. Sort of, I don't know what happened. Okay, so there's the future possibility. The coachee comes to you and they say, oh, I'm stuck. So they arrive and they're here. Right? Your job as a coach is to help them to reach this future possibility that they want. It's a very pragmatic way of working, because I'm there to help you get here. The thing is, the journey from here to there, we'd like it to go like this. It's like, I've got 3 objectives. I want to have a more effective team. I want to not feel so stressed, and I want to, I want to have a happy work environment. Okay? Let's say that you'd think from there to there, but because it's coaching, you can't, because it's a developmental journey. This person needs to develop their own level of awareness, and so coaching looks a little bit like this. And for example, the case of my budget person, sometimes you do have to reference the past. Now, if I was a therapist, I could not only reference the past, but I could unpack that. I could really go in and unpack that. And many therapists spend years training on exactly how to do that. But coaches are not therapists. So it's one thing to visit the past and say, that's a great insight. Right, how are we going to deal with this in order to can that help us get unstuck? Knowing where that feeling comes. If that person was to tell you, well, actually, this memory is so disturbing, I need to pause and unpack it. I then refer the person out to see a counselor or a therapist. And we either pause the coaching for a while they do that, or what many people choose to do is they go for therapy, they bring the insights into the coaching, because we are working on very pragmatic outcomes, and they've got stuff, deliverables they want to achieve. So often this is unlocked by a professional in that field. We don't. We work really carefully with our students to make them see the difference and when to refer out. Which is why now more and more in coaching, we were always doing it, but it's becoming more and more official that supervision for coaches is really important. You need to have a mentor, a coach mentor, or a coach supervisor you can go to and say, look, I'm feeling out of my depth with this coachee, I'm not sure where to go to, you know, and to discuss, obviously holding confidentiality. So, therapists, on the other hand, can not only do this, some schools of therapy do nurse to future outcomes, but they definitely are allowed to and are trained to unpack this. Specific to coaching, I believe, is very important. Well, I don't know if it's specific, but in particular, where coaching is very different to some schools of therapy, not all, is that we work in the area of developing competence. So in particular, the 6-month associate coaching course, which is the first one that has to be done, is specifically focused on how do you coach somebody to develop a new capability, a new competence. The year-long course, so we have sort of a journey. This is the depth. This is time, and that's the depth of your coaching. And we go along like that axis. The first kind of coaching is what we call spontaneous coaching, or informal coaching, or corridor coaching, or possibly type 1 coaching, if you want to. This kind of coaching, we teach people in the workplace, we teach people, every lay person can learn it in a day, but they won't be able to do it very successfully unless they have practice sessions, so when we work in corporates, we will often teach many people this this spontaneous coaching, because it's the kind of coaching you do in the corridor, literally. It doesn't take long, it's not very deep, but people are stuck. And you learn to listen differently, you engage differently, you don't develop new capabilities, you let people get their own new insight, and they have the innate capability to do it themselves. So, this is a one-day process then we have an action learning coaching circle process after that to embed those behaviors. But let's say you say, you know what, I not only want to do spontaneous coaching, I want to learn how to develop people's competency so that they can become more self-correcting and self-generating. I want that pragmatic ability. That's type 2 or competency based coaching, and that's what we call the associate coaching course. That's the 6-month program. We spend 6 months working on how do you develop somebody's level of competence in an integral way. So not just can I do it, but how do I feel about doing it, and how do I think about it. And of course, physiologically, how do I relate to that? But even then, there's a deeper way, there's a deeper level of coaching, which is when I work with somebody around their way of being in the world, which is what we teach in our year-long program, the professional coaching course, which is a year. And the way of being, let's say, for example, I've had people who come to me and say, you know, I used to be a hard-driving, fairly, aggressive executive, led from the front, made things happen. I'm 2 years out from retirement. Part of my portfolio is I'm supposed to be stepping back and teaching the young Turks all these young things, bright young things. And I want to do it, but I need to know how to let go and to teach others and let them step forward. But I've got no idea how to do that. I keep trying to do it, but I can't. That's an example of somebody whose entire way of being is one thing, and they realize that actually they need to evolve into something new. Never lose it's not about losing what they've had all these years, but they want to expand. that sort of way of being is more than just developing a few competencies. It's working in your actual narrative, your actual underlying presence in the world. And that's what we teach in the yearling course. And then some were saying, what about the master classes? The mastery is a 3-year, it's not a master's, it's not a university master's. But it's, after that, how do we deepen and grow? So we have a 3-year mastery program where we do a series of master classes. But this philosophy and this is a constant sort of deepening stream. And I have to say, I've been doing this full time for more than 10 years, 11 or 12 years, and I'm still a beginner. I still learn new things all the time. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing. I used to be so bored. I had a number of degrees, and I would always go to courses, and I always had this scratchy feeling of like boredom so often. But since I've started this work, it's like I'm never bored. In fact, I never know enough. There's always more to do. But not in a scratchy way, but in a very beautiful, fulfilling way. So those are some of my memories of the questions that people had. Maybe I should pause for a moment. I get so excited I can talk about this all day long. We've got some time for questions, and what else?
Thank you. I'm one of those who are completely, totally ignorant about coaching, so thank you for this lesson. One of the challenges I find in the workplace is, other than to deal with the people first, is also to deal with people, political and social cultures. People always bring that to their offices. And I find that is a big challenge, because you have to try to tell people you don't need to cheat or to lie or to refuse to work in a team because to achieve a goal, because they're not a threat. Working with a team is not a threat. And you don't have to hide anything away from your colleagues, but you have to learn how to work together to achieve a certain goal. And I find that mainly it's coming from not their past, but their culture, their social cultures, and how they were brought up, either in the environment or also in how the political culture affects their bringing up. Ibn Khaldun, I don't know if you know, it's an Arab philosopher. He says that he talks a lot about how political and environment affects people's behavior, and especially, and they bring that everywhere they go. So how do you deal with that?
We have an answer to that when we're on the brink of world peace. But what I can say to you is that actually one of the most wonderful compliments ever. Just a couple of months ago, we finished our 6-month course in Johannesburg, and one of the delegates was a black man, a South African black man, who had spent 10 years in both Geneva and New York at the UN and what world thing he was doing in New York. And so part of the diplomatic service, the foreign service. I don't quite know how he arrived on our course, but we get these people occasionally. And he came to me and he said, Janine, I have to tell you that this course has restored my faith in human beings. And I said, so that's wonderful. And he said, let me explain. He said, I've been all over the world and done all these things in places which are supposed to be caring about humanity. He said, this is the first environment I've been in where truly people haven't brought their political and racial story into the conversation. He says, I've had 6 months of race-free engagement, and you have no idea. It has restored my faith in human beings that it is possible. There's something about the way you teach and the style of working with people that has allowed everybody in this room to engage with me as a human being and not as a black diplomat and you as a white this and So I said to him, that is probably the most incredible thing anyone has ever said about the style of work. But I think that the premise of it is there is no answer. If people are not willing to let go, then. But there is something in particular about the premise of development in the school of coaching that we call, would people be okay if I go into this? It's one of our foundational philosophies. It's called your structure of interpretation. And the premise is, look, we tend to look at our behaviors and actions, and we tend to judge by our results. Okay? So most people operate here. Whether it's a learning cycle, I don't like the way you talk to me, so I'm going to behave in this way. I want you to change, I'm going to shout at you, or I'm going to demand you do this thing because I want a different result. And this is a first order learning. Those of you who know learning theory, so first order learning sits here. And many of our political and management structures are around saying, if you don't like this result, then just behave differently. So, and we try and operate here. And the problem with that is that, as you know, people will adjust their behavior for a bit, but then they slide back. And what we say is that our structure of interpretation causes us to see certain things, but it also causes us to not see certain things. So for example, I'm a musician as well, I play the violin, but music's very important to me. So wherever I go, I notice the background music. I just do. And I was talking to my husband, I said, oh, that's just a propaganda American movie. He said, how can you say that? How do you know? I said, because the music. Just listen to the music. It's all this triumphant brass stuff. He said, that's him. He said, I never noticed the music. That's just bizarre. And I had no idea that there would be somebody who wouldn't notice the music in a movie. Just, okay. So that's a small example, but for people, for example, in South Africa, who are alert, who've been wounded in the apartheid years, for them they're so alert to this insult or slights or feeling, you know, that how are people looking down on me or you know, and so for them it's incredibly strong. But for other people who weren't necessarily wounded in the apartheid years, it's like, what's the problem? Why are you so sensitive? What's going on? And our structure of interpretation, the thing is this, what we teach, we spend time, and we found a way of trying to get this over to people almost in a day, where they start to grasp it, is that each of us, our structure of interpretation starts being formed from birth, or even before birth. And it is from birth, it's even the amount of time you were held as an infant. That's where you start to develop your neural networks of your capacity to connect to others. And every single thing that happens to you from birth onwards informs and embeds in your structure of interpretation. Which it turns out, this is philosophy from Martin Heidegger et al., many others, Buber as well. But actually the neuroscience will tell you these instinctual patterns sit in your instinctual memory, in your cellular memory. But many people thought they could never change. But it turns out our instinctual patterns can be shifted. Just like cognitively the brain has a plasticity, turns out your instinctual intelligence has a plasticity as well. So whether you talk it in neuroscience language or philosophy, what this style of coaching does is it says, for as long as you are in this structure of interpretation, then you won't see anything possible. Your only choice of behavior would be to look down on a certain type of person, or to shout at us, because that's all that you know. But the job of a coach is to find a way to flex or enlarge the structure of interpretation. So that now, you will never lose this, but you get new behaviors possible with new results. And so we work look here. And we say, what is this structural interpretation? Where is this? And because it's embodied, because your structural interpretation is embodied, you have to work not just on an insight level, but on a behavioral level, on an actual physiological level. So to shift somebody, you can't just talk to them. To get people to behave differently towards each other, you can't just talk to them about behaving differently. As you've seen, it doesn't work. You need to work out for each unique individual, and this is the challenge, why it can't easily happen on a large level. For each unique individual, what is their structural interpretation? What is causing them to be stuck? And what is it about their way of being in the world that we can open up to allow for new possibilities? And that's what integral coaching looks like. Using two things, language and practices. These are the two. So there's an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming person here at Chateau. There may even be more. But, and that's a hugely specialist and wonderful rich use of language, which we also use a similar level of language. And then we also have a whole thing around practices. So that's what you learn in the 6-month course, is how do you use language and practices to enlarge or expand someone's structural interpretation, so that new possibilities become available to them, that come from them. That it's not me telling you what to do, because then I'm just working here. And that's why change doesn't stay. So this is all about the premise of human development. That's what's underneath this. Does it always work? No. It doesn't. But can it work? And we have found ways of working with people in groups, which means that change can happen in a collective environment, that you're not stuck only doing one-on-one. You can work in groups where you can shift these things.
Just a follow-up question, I have 2 questions. One, as I don't know much about coaching and how this is structured, I'm just wondering, is this something that perhaps managers with organizations, particularly dealing with field teams, should perhaps take in their spare time? Is it an evening course? Is it an intensive course throughout the day? And is this something that is coaching something that should be done primarily by someone from the outside? Or would this be a good background for a manager, particularly dealing with teams that work in the field, such as the UN or NGOs and so on, where there are a lot of factors come into play of insecurities, or how do I deal with the situation, how do I deal with colleagues, how do I deal with other organizations, particularly also in times of crisis?
Yes, yes. It's a great question, because actually more than 60% of our student body, I call them students, but as Daniel said, when he was one of our youngest students, and he had just turned 40, so at the time. Our student body is between 35 and 65. It's more mature. I think because of the level of philosophical depth. But more than 60% of our students are actually leaders or managers within, or human beings, within contexts where they're not planning to become professional coaches. They want to understand how to engage with human beings differently, how to cope with situations, how to bring more out of their teams, how to engage with people in a more powerful way. And that's what surprised us, no end. We actually thought we would have these classrooms full of coaches, but actually we don't. We have classrooms full of people who want to become more effective in the workplace or in whichever environment they're in. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, to that end, there are very few of our students who are full-time. Most of them are working. And so, I think I do have one slide, which I actually have. The program is modular-based. So, yes, there are 8 contact days. Yeah, if I put it are 8 contact days. So it's 3 days, and that's it during a week, 3, 3, and 2. The rest is all done in the evenings, offline. There's some people here who are currently students with us who you can talk to if you wish to tune in with them. But it's specific, yeah, there are very few people who are not actually in full-time jobs who actually do the program.
Well, it's a related question. There are so many coaching programs out there today. It's amazing. It seems to be really a field that interests a lot of people today. I think the complexity of the work sciences. But how would you distinguish between some of the other programs that are out there? How would you describe the differences?
I haven't done a study of the other coaching schools because I reckon that's up to the student to do. And also I don't want to focus too much on what other people are doing. But what I can say that people specifically say they come to us for is, one of the things is more and more students want a credible program. Because as the market becomes more sophisticated, what happened in South Africa, nobody knew much about coaching. Every Tom, Dick and Harry, Tom, Dick and Jane, had a business card. They said, oh, I've been 20 years in the HR world, I'm going to write a business card, coach, and I'm a coach. And people were charging huge fees. It was just a gold rush. And but what started happening is we were the first coaching school to be linked to a business school in South Africa. So probably the first coaching school doing anything with the ICF. And what happened is, funny enough, most of the HR professional field came to study with us. And then they got promoted, and now in South Africa we have one of the most sophisticated markets because it's the buyers of coaching, the people who use coaches, who say, actually, I'm not going to employ a coach who's not certified through an ICF program, the program isn't from a credible institution with a track record, and there the link to the university is important. And the fact that our US parent school also has been going for 30 years. So it's one of the leading schools in the USA. And of course, yeah, we're accredited through the Health Professional Council as well. So people want credibility, they want certification, and they want to know that, and they like to contact the student body and say, well, what is your experience? So how else to differentiate yourself? That's why we run these ones, because there are some schools of coaching which are unashamedly, and have a place, they're much more directive. Certainly in some countries in Europe, my understanding from all the people who've told me is that many schools of coaching are actually directive-based. They're more like mentoring than coaching, than what I call coaching. So I think it's very important that people who are planning to study need to understand, are you going to a non-directive or a generative style of coaching, or are you going to the more directive style school? There was a question before. No? Done? Okay, so perhaps you need to go, yes. I'd like to perhaps suggest we do have, if I may say, there's Roz and Tatiana who are currently studying with us, doing the 6-month program. If you wish to ask any specific question, because of course I'm biased. You need to know.
So it's my number
It's too late. But if you want to talk to someone who's actually doing it and immersed in it, it might be another way of doing that. And of course, Daniel and myself and tomorrow is
and me too, I'm also studying.